I'd really like you to do a short testimony. See, he's reeling me in. I'd like you to just do a short testimony for our Upwards basketball program. And I'd like you to come do that in February. He said, sure, I'm ready. Let's do it. So I did it, and before I even walked out of the gymnasium, he said, all right, we're ready for the full-length motion portion of this. So I said, okay. So I'm really happy to see all the faces out here. I had a very morbid thought standing here a minute ago. I looked around at all the faces and realized that had I died 2 years ago in a crash, this could have been the funeral service. You sitting there tonight would be the ones most likely at that service. But the neat thing about it is, instead of pastor standing up here saying how great Andy Jackson was, Andy Jackson gets to stand here and tell you how great God is. And that's the neat part about my story tonight. Oh, we are alive, okay. I thought we were still waiting. So I've almost all my life I've had many hobbies, but two of them that have really stuck with me my entire life have been photography and flying. And flying started in the 6th grade. My sister had a friend who had a plane, and we grew up in a small town in West Virginia, it's Beckley, and for some reason we had an airplane that did traffic reports in this little town of Beckley. Somebody had a plane, had time, and conned somebody into, I don't know why they had a traffic service from an airplane, but it was cool because a 6th grader got to go flying with them, and that got into my veins. And all through my life, I have had friends at work that have had planes. I've never had to get a pilot's license. I just sit in the back seat taking pictures. It's been a good ride. And in photography, I got involved in that in the 9th grade, and so have done that all my life. And in 2011, I was asked to do a senior portrait for a young man over at Williamsburg Christian Academy, and he was a basketball player, so I needed to find someone who had a fast plane. And so I called a friend of mine. He couldn't make it tonight. He's a commercial pilot here in the area, flies for Alaska Air. And he says, I know the man. His name is John Williams. John's here tonight. He's hiding, but I see him. He's here tonight, and he's a good friend of mine. And so we did that shoot out at the airport, and we did it with his faster plane that day. But sitting in the hangar was a fun-looking airplane. And in fact, he took some of my crew with me that day. I didn't go that day. I was focused on the photo shoot. But they had a blast. So that's John on the right of the screen there. So John and I have been flying ever since. And the plane that we love to fly in is a light sport aircraft. That's the classification. It's a 2-seater, as you can see, or 1.5, actually. And it is a fun aircraft to fly. It's open cockpit, as you can see. His particular wing on the plane that we flew when we crashed we were able to go 110 miles an hour. And there's nothing like flying through trees, flying feet off the water, flying with the birds, flying at sunset, flying at night. There's nothing like it. It's basically nothing more than a lap belt with a 100 horsepower Rotex engine on your back. It is awesome. I have a bad day at work. I come home. I call John, or John calls me. I meet him in the airport. Jump in. What work? I forgot all about it. In fact, those nights I usually have a hard time sleeping. We fly day or night. There's nothing more spectacular than flying on 4th of July over Yorktown and watching 15 other fireworks shows within a half an hour from Richmond to Virginia Beach. It's just, I can't describe it. And there are some retired pilots in here. I know of at least two. One's a B-52 pilot, and the other, I think, was a B-47. I don't remember. Yep, got a thumbs up on that one. Nothing like flying in that ultralight. It's not really technically an ultralight, but if you saw it in the air, it's an ultralight. Well, on May 24th, 2014, my life changed, and so did John's. It was a typical evening flight. We took off. We would love to go catch the sunsets. Spectacular sunsets here in the area. You get on the James River, and you start flying, and the lower the sun gets, the longer for miles you see that sunset reflection down the James River. It's just spectacular. So on this particular night, we took off just like we always did, circled over the field, came over College Creek. If you're familiar with College Creek, we dropped down, literally dropped down right on top of the water, scooted around the Surrey nuclear plant a couple of times. That's why my hair's out. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. We started flying up the James River by Jamestown Island, and what we always did is John would frame objects for me to shoot from the back seat. And so we did buoys, we did barges. Those two particular pictures you just saw came from this actual flight. Several of these pictures came from that actual flight that night. I don't have in the presentation, but this particular barge driver or boat captain or whatever they are called, when we looked at the close-up, the zoomed-in picture, it looked like he was sleeping at the wheel. So if you're out on the James River, beware of the barge. It was an awesome flight that night. The temperature, the air temperature was warm. It was calm. There wasn't any turbulence. Beautiful sunset. And we went up to Governor's Land, went up to the Chickahominy River. We turned, and we're coming back down towards the ferry. We were at 300 feet, going 107 miles an hour. And we passed by John's friend Mike and his daughter. They waved to us as we went by. We got to the 4-H camp there that they have just before the ferry. And he did a slight bank out into the river. We climbed from 300 to 800 feet. He did a hard bank left right over the ferry. And then we had the Jamestown Island, or Jamestown Beach, just on our starboard side. And as you can see from this picture, if you've been out to the beach here recently, it's changed quite a bit since that picture was taken 2 years ago. So that was when John pulled back on the throttle to idle, and we were just casually coming from 800 feet down, cruising back up the river, the same way we had just come. There was an object that I wanted to photograph, and it was an osprey nest out on a channel marker, and we both wanted to see whether there were chicks or eggs in the nest, and I was going to document it and show his friends. When the two words you never, ever want to hear your pilot say came over to intercom, "Oh no!" And that was about the time I took this picture that's out of focus. And 3 seconds later, we crashed violently into the James River. I watched it all in denial. I couldn't believe it. I sat there and I watched the whole thing in slow motion. It felt like slow motion. It was a horrific impact. John took the brunt of it. I was in the back seat. But the water, hitting that cool water on that warm night, was a shock to the system. And of all the times we have flown together and trained verbally over the intercom, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do, I didn't do any of the things that night. The very first thing I should have done is taken a deep breath, just like you do when you dive into a pool. I didn't. I was breathless, I was speechless. I just couldn't believe what was going on. The good news was we were only in 6 feet of water at this point out about 400 feet into the James River. The bad news is I was trapped 3 feet under, and I couldn't release myself. I always had the lap belt latch right here because his seat back comes right here in front of me. And so when I'm carrying a camera or two cameras, it gets very difficult. So I always put it over here so then scratch my camera and so that I can find it easily. Well, that night in the haste of getting into that airplane, whoever had flown in at last had it adjusted right here. So I hopped in and just put it together, didn't even think about it. That was a mistake because when we hit, the impact of me going in behind John, his seat back went up into my rib cage, totally obscuring, and I didn't remember it was there anyway. I was searching for it. Looking back, it was really kind of comical. Somebody could have videotaped it. It was, I was doing the Macarena. It was just, I was looking for stuff everywhere, and I was not being very successful. The urge to breathe was overwhelming after a while. And to tell you that I was scared would be an understatement of the year. It was sheer terror. I was scared out of my skull. And It was at that point I had taken on some water, and I realized I was going to die right here and right now. This is it. And just as clear as I'm looking at you now, I saw my wife and my 2 daughters flash in front of my eyes, and a peace that I cannot describe to you flooded my soul. I wish I could bottle it. There's days at work that I wish I could just pop that out and re-experience the feeling that I had at that very moment. I just can't articulate that peace that flooded my soul at that moment. But before my next breath in heaven, my seatbelt released. It exploded. Everything underwater is kind of amplified. It sounded like it just, boom, exploded. And instead of waking up in heaven, I woke up in the surface next to John, covered in gasoline, going, oh my gosh, we survived. A couple days later, I was reading in Acts chapter 12, and it got to verse 7. And this is when Peter is in jail. He's bound in chains. He's on the floor. He's asleep between 2 guards. And God sent an angel, shined a light onto him, and broke his chains and freed him. And I read that, and I was like, whew, I can relate. I really feel like God just freed me from my chains that night. And that verse now, really sticks with me. When I read that verse, it has a great meaning to me now. I believe God freed me. But you know what? Had he not, I was prepared for my final flight. 30 years before I had accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Savior, I was saved, and I knew my boarding pass was good. I was going to heaven when I died. But God didn't have to punch my ticket that night. So what lessons have I learned, and what lessons can we all learn from being in a river experience? I'd like to give you 4. And I want to, if you have your Bible, you can turn to Joshua chapter 3. For the sake of time, not going to read the verses, but I am going to summarize, and I'll tell you which ones I'm looking at. But I think we can look at a parallel between my experience and what Joshua and the Israelites had there on the banks of the Jordan River. How should we follow God? Well, in Joshua chapter 3, verses 1 through 5 that Pastor read for me, just to summarize that, basically the Israelites finally get to the banks of the Jordan. If they can get across the Jordan, they enter the promised land. And many years before, God had made a covenant or a promise to Abraham that your descendants would inherit Canaan, or the promised land. But due to disbelief and disobedience, he didn't get to see it in his lifetime. And then Jacob and Moses got a chance, and the same thing, disobedience and disbelief, they didn't get to see it in their lifetime. So now it's Joshua's turn. And Joshua, as Pastor said, and they camped there for 3 days. He said, let's sanctify ourselves before we go in, so God can do great things. Well, that's a big churchy word. So I'm going to break it down for you. Instead of sanctify, it's consecrate. Okay, that's another big churchy word. It means total surrender. Totally surrendered their will to God so that they could be ready and prepared for when God was going to do great things for them and get them into the promised land. So the promised land, Canaan, represents God's inheritance. It's given to the believer and claimed by faith. So the very first lesson, and we have in the bulletins, if you've got a bulletin, there's a little note sheet, and there's an outline there that has some blanks. So if you prefer to take notes, you can. But the very first blank is, and our very first lesson is, to successfully follow God, we need to take personal responsibility for our own spiritual journey. We can't rely upon our parents. We can't rely on our friends, our pastor, our priest, our rabbi, whoever. We cannot rely on anybody but ourselves for our own personal journey. But our challenge is, how do we consecrate ourselves daily? What does that look like in our life to consecrate ourselves? Well, it means we need to learn how to self-feed, which means we need to read the Bible, not just read it, but study it, get into it, understand the context. How does that relate to the Old Testament? That's how you study. That's how you get to know God, is to read and study His Word and to pray. And it's kind of like eating. At least for me. I eat breakfast usually before 6 or by 6. And by 11 o'clock, my stomach is singing the blues. Mr. Wheatley here can hear it 3 offices down. And so I'm usually trying to eat lunch about 11 o'clock. If I don't, I'm just grouchy. I'm just a miserable person by 2 o'clock. And if I only eat once a week, I'm not going to survive. I'm going to starve. The same thing spiritually. If the only Bible study that we do is when we're here on Sunday mornings, church once a week or twice a year, we're going to starve spiritually as well. So it's up to us to take responsibility for that our own personal journey. Why is it so hard to feed ourselves spiritually? Well, I think it's distraction. Squirrel. We have so many things available to us at our fingertips on our smartphones. We have apps. We have millions of apps that can take us anywhere we want to go. We have TVs that have 800 channels, and maybe 2 of them are good. We have social media. We have sporting events. We have so many things. And in and of themselves, none of those are bad. But if they supplant or take the place of us spending time with God, then it is bad. They become an idol to us. Well, John and I'm getting a little behind on the slides there. There's the aftermath of the plane. So you can kind of see the results there. There's a seat belt. There's Pastor. John and I have been flying for about 3 years prior to the crash. We had never had an issue before. Now, I didn't say, John, that we never had close calls. We never had any issues. I can remember once coming in the Hummel field, we got into a downdraft just before landing, and it literally just threw us down at least 50 feet instantly. And that's when everything kind of goes up in the air, and you're like, "Yay!" I hate roller coasters, strangely enough. I love flying with John in his plane. Roller coasters are not good for me, but that felt like a roller coaster coming in for that landing that day, and we just dropped out of the sky. We were flying along. We were in our comfort zone one moment, and the next moment, we were in the bottom of the river. How long does it take us to crash spiritually? Well, it can sneak up on us too. I get up, I should say, when I get up, when my alarm clock goes off. I have my wife who's going to hold me accountable. My alarm clock goes off at 5 o'clock every morning, and I usually get up within 5 minutes of the alarm clock, at least to hit snooze. But when it goes off on time, and I get up on time, I do my personal devotion, and I read, and I study, and I pray, and I go to work. But on those mornings where I hit the snooze 14 times, and I'm now all of a sudden late to work, and I'm in a panic, I'm in a rush, I will skip my quiet time that morning. And I can tell you that on those mornings when I skip my quiet time, those days are the worst. That's when I'm in a foul mood. Things just don't go well with my relationships at work, and people know it. So the very first lesson is to take responsibility for our own spiritual journey. The second lesson I'd like you to see is that we need to give God control. In verses 6 to 11, we see Joshua, God is telling Joshua to tell the priests to pick up the ark and carry it well ahead of the people, which means the ark needed to go first. Well, what is in the ark? What did that represent? Well, the ark represents the presence of God. Inside that ark were 3 items. You had Aaron's staff, which is kind of like a walking stick, if you will. Aaron was Moses' brother. And if you remember your history, God made it bud and bloom. And so that was representing God's power. There was a jar of manna that was in the ark. Manna is what God provided in the desert for Moses and the Israelites to eat. That represented God's provision. And then he had the 10 Commandments, which represented God's path for our lives. So why would we ever go into a river experience without God leading us? When I started flying with John, it was in January of 2012. And it wasn't the first flight where I sat up front, but it was 3 or 4 flights after we had been flying. And I realized that I needed a jumpsuit, so I got my redneck flight suit. It was pair of Carhartt coveralls, Arctic versions, and I had 4 layers of clothes underneath it because open cockpit plane, it gets cold. In fact, if you know anything about wind chill, if it's 30 degrees outside and you're going 100 miles an hour or you have a 100 mile an hour wind, the wind chill makes it feel like it's minus 33. So it's very cold. And this particular flight, I don't remember, John, why you asked me. I don't know what was going on. He asked me to sit up front. Well, if you sit up front, you are basically, like in this picture, you are responsible for the steering of the plane as you're taking off and landing, the braking, and the instrumentation, navigation, and the radio. John sat in the back. The pilot sat in the back. I was up here with all these controls. He was flying the plane, but he was in the back. And it started off pretty good until about 100 feet in the air, and then I realized I got a leak in my helmet. There was an air leak. And so the leak stirred around the cold air in my helmet, and my eyes started to water, and my tears started to freeze, and my eyelids started to stick. And suddenly, I was very uncomfortable with my surroundings. I did not like what was going on, and I couldn't just say, pull off to the side here at the rest area, I got to get out. We continued to fly for a little while. I don't know how we landed that day. I don't know how I kept it on the runway. He must have just been saying left, right, left, right. I honestly don't remember. But it was miserable being out front. I was used to flying behind John, very comfortable behind John. He shielded me from the air. He shielded me from the crash. I felt a lot more secure back there. Well, how often do we go through life blinded by our own pride, thinking we're sitting in the pilot's seat and not letting God control our lives? I'm guilty of that. I'm sure you're guilty of that at times. I can remember as a kid in the 1970s seeing on cars bumper stickers that says, "God is my co-pilot." How many remember that old sticker? It may still be around. I don't know. I haven't seen them for quite a while. I used to think those bumper stickers were really cool. I thought, wow, they must be Christians in that car. And I always thought highly of those. And then the older I got, I realized that's really bad theology. You know? God needs to be your pilot, not your co-pilot. If you're the pilot, you're going to crash. The winds of this world are going to steer you off course, and when you crash and burn, you're going to go, what happened? It's because you were in the pilot seat. So lesson 1, take responsibility for your own spiritual journey. Lesson 2, we need to give God control. So then we move into verses 12 through 17. And here's where God told Joshua to tell the priests, tell the people, that the priests were now going to pick up the ark, they're going to walk down into the river, and they were going to go down into the river, so all 12 of them had their ankles covered. I don't know how high up it was, but just their feet. And they were to go, and they were to stand in the river, and they were to wait. And just wait there until God did something. Now, what God did was he heaped up the water in a place called Adam, which was several miles upstream from where they were standing. Now, I had a pastor 4 years ago that preached on this particular series of verses, and he came up with the idea that it was about 6 hours, that if somebody dammed the water up immediately right now on the Jordan River, it would have taken about 6 hours for the water to clear where they were standing. And who knows, for it to dry, for 40,000 Israelites to go across, it may have taken even longer. But the point was, they stood there and they waited. Sometimes God's people must get their feet wet by faith before God goes to work. So the third lesson I'd like you to see for following God is we need to learn to wait on God. Now, by show of hands, I'd like to see how many people love to wait for anything. Okay, maybe the mic's not working. How many people love that? Well, we have one guy in the back says he loves to wait. Mom's shaking her head. We live in a rushed, hurry society, don't we? The oxymoron of fast food is, it's turned into an oxymoron. There's no such thing as fast food anymore. And if it is, it's not right usually. And we blow a gasket. We get upset. We get in traffic. We drive an hour home from work. We get on 64. Need I say any more? And we lose our cool. So why does God make us wait? What benefit is there from waiting? Well, I think that waiting and waiting sound a lot alike. Have you ever walked across a stream or a river or a fast body of water? How could those two be similar? Well, when you're walking in a stream or a river, you typically can't see the bottom. The water's running. Sometimes it's white from the white caps or whatever. You can't see where you're going, so you can't see where to place your foot. So you're cautious. You're taking your time. And then you step on a rock. And the rocks in the river are usually what? Smooth. And they have algae. And they're slick. So your senses go on high alert. You're paying really close attention to what's going on. It was about 2012 I bought a new lens for my camera, a new zoom lens, and I wanted to go out on Jamestown Beach, out to one of those channel markers that are about 200 feet out in the water. I didn't have a kayak yet at that time that I rigged for photography, so I decided I was just going to book it out there on foot. And it started great. I was like the priest, ankle deep, we're good, carrying my camera and my lens. And then the water started going up. But the ground was flat, it was smooth, it was sandy. This is going to be easy. But I didn't know how far out I was going to get before the bottom dropped out. And I got almost all the way out there, and I stubbed my toe on a rock. All this time I was getting comfortable with the sand and the mud, and now all of a sudden I'm in the rocks. And I can tell you, the water's up to here, I'm holding my camera up, and scared to death that I was going to trip and fall. Wanted to get this osprey picture so bad, and I got just past the jetty and the tide. Now the water's up to here, and all my fat became, floaties. And I would take a step, and the tide, I'd end up down here. And so my senses were on high alert. I was focused on every step. And I think that's why God puts us, or allows us, to go into river experiences, so that we can retune our spirit to His. We can pay close attention to what God's really trying to teach us during those times. So we need to learn to wait on God because it strengthens our faith. We don't know the future, but we know who holds the future. So sometimes we are placed in a river experience to remember that we can't do it alone. And very often, though, it's the river experience where we first realize for the very first time that we don't have God with us and we need God. So I think God can use both to be fruitful. Well, we crashed on a Saturday night. It was Memorial Weekend, Saturday night. And all day Sunday I was in bed groaning and moaning and couldn't move. I was sore. I was still in shock. I couldn't get a hold of John, and I was really concerned. As you can see, his helmet is here, and up on the screen you can see that it cracked. Well, the night of the crash, the adrenaline was pumping through our veins so much that we could have walked on water home. We didn't realize the extent of the injuries. And John, for several days after the initial day, was in the hospital. He couldn't walk at all. He was basically purple from here to his toes. Every inch of him was purple. He looked like Barney. Sorry, John. So I didn't know that at the time. All I knew was what had happened to us. So in the absence of being able to speak with John, I was worried. I was agonizing. And during the crash, I lost my glasses. And that's happened when I took the helmet off when I finally came to the top. I just, it's a very snug fit. It went, my camera went, everything went into the bottom. And on Monday morning, I remember waking up still stiff and sore. I had talked to John by then. I had this overwhelming thought in my head, go to the river and get your glasses. And I thought, oh, yeah, that'd save me $600, so I'm not going. And it just kept nagging at me and nagging and nagging. I got out of bed, I put on my swimming trunks. I called Clint, who's my paparazzi here in the aisle taking pictures. And I said, Clint, get your rope, get your wetsuit. Let's go out to the river and find my glasses. Now, Clint's a loyal friend. He didn't say anything much except to snicker. And so I walked downstairs, and I was walking through the living room, and Savannah and Susan were there on the couch, and they looked at me and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to get my glasses. We'll see. I had an old pair that she had brought to me in the emergency room, and I could see long distances to drive, but I couldn't see, I couldn't see how fast I was driving on the odometer. It was really bad, but I could see the cars in front of me, most of them. So I wanted to go to the river so bad, and Clint met me there at the river. He brought a 10-foot strap or 10-foot rope, and we waded out into that cold water, and it was Memorial Weekend, but it was cold. And I had him stand. Now, it's 400 feet out. You really don't have a whole lot of landmarks. You don't know exactly where you are. You don't remember exactly where you crashed. Of course, you can't really see anything anyway. I couldn't. I had him hold the rope, and I was at the other end, and he would just pivot, and I would do revolutions around him like a penguin with my bare feet trying to find my glasses. And every revolution, I would come in 12 inches, and I would do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And after about the third placement in the river, Clint is starting to vocalize his thoughts. And, and he had a wetsuit on. And I said, Clint, I don't know if it was God. I know I had a strong desire. And when I have those strong desires, I don't ignore them. I know I was called here to the river to find my glasses. He said, Andy, I admire your faith. Ha, ha, ha. But 3 hours later, I stepped on my glasses, and I said, praise the Lord. I was so ecstatic that I had found my glasses, saved $600, and I could see to drive home. It was awesome. So my waiting lasted a little longer, though. I went to work the next day. I realistically should not have gone to work, probably for a year. But I went to work that next morning, and I love vanity plates here in Virginia. I love to read the vanity plates. 9 years in this parking lot, I had never seen that license plate crash. That license plate was only there for that 1 week. I finally figured out who it was, Michael Wilmore, and he had to borrow his daughter's car for a week. It's not been there since. And I just so happened to park right behind it. And I looked at that, and I said, God, you have such a sense of humor. This is awesome. But my waiting lasted a very long time. It was months and months and months. And I studied the Bible, trying to find the meaning of all of it. Why didn't we die that night? One of my sisters counsels veterans with PTSD. She strongly suggested therapy or write your story out. Talk about it. Well, I don't have a problem talking, as you know. So I wrote it out. And with the help of my oldest daughter, Andrea, editor-in-chief, I got it finished. And such a burden was lifted off my shoulders after writing that. It really helped me. This is basically the events up to the crash that day, the details. But it was a very strange season. I remember there was a couple of times, about 3 months and 6 months after the crash, I was home alone. And I was watching a movie. And the first movie I watched was Castaway. Yeah, you understand. About 10% or 20% into the movie, Tom Hanks is in a FedEx jet, crashes into the ocean. And when I saw that scene, and I saw the tumbling underneath, and I saw him getting trapped, and I saw his pilots dying, I freaked. I had to shut it off. My two hairs stood up on my head, and I cried like a baby. And that went on for months. Little triggers like that would just absolutely shut me down. Unbroken was the other movie. It wasn't quite as bad. I'd kind of gotten over the Castaway, and I knew this one was coming. But I was very concerned that I would never get out of this fog, but it did slowly, over time, start to lift. And during that time, God really spoke to me and gave me some revelations. First thing I learned was my schedule was just way too busy. I was working 50 hours a week on average. I was working 30 hours a week on my photography business. And I would come home every night. Some nights I would shoot sporting events, 2, 3 a night for 6 nights in a row. I would come home. I'd go up into my man cave. We had a nice 3-story large house. And I'd go up to my man cave, and I would just work on photos while my kids and my wife were downstairs home alone. And so that started to prick my heart. And I was a president of the Williamsburg Photo Club. I was very active in that club, and we had church obligations and family obligations, and I had other hobbies that I did. I was just busy. I mean, that was in my veins. Just, I'm a guy. I'm going to get it done. I'm just, do the deal. That was just how I thought about things. And 4 weeks after the crash, we decided, you know what? We don't need all this stuff. It's stuff. And so we listed our house, and the realtor is here tonight. She did a wonderful job. Actually, she was on the other end, the buying end, out here in the country. And we listed the house 4 weeks later, and by January, we had moved into a house 40% of the size that we had just left. Now, for all you non-math majors out there, that's less than half. So we were selling and giving away half the stuff in our house. And I can tell you, and I think my wife would agree, it was liberating. It was awesome, except for the man cave. I thought I was going to miss that man cave. But I resigned as the president of the photo club, pulled out of the club altogether, and I really slowed down my all my photography. And it's been really good. Now I work from a laptop. I'm in the family room with the family, and it's really been good. Even my wife has found extra time for things. She doesn't have such a large house to keep up with as well. But it took a lot of waiting to get to this point, but it's been really, really worth it. What is God trying to tell you? Can you still hear his small, quiet voice? Or are you distracted? Sometimes we just need to slow down and wait. In Isaiah 40:31, it says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not grow weary, and they shall walk and not faint." We need to wait upon the Lord. And the fourth lesson that I think we can learn from this experience is we need to remember what God did for us. In Joshua chapter 4, after the 40,000 had crossed the Jordan and they got into the promised land, Joshua now has the priest go down and get stones, one for each. And they came up and they built the monument. Joshua also did the same thing in the river. But the one on the shore is the one I want to speak about. He had them stack all those rocks up to make some type of monument. And the reason that he did that is so that future generations that walked by and said, "What's that?" they could tell them how big their God was. They could tell them what God did for them in crossing over the Jordan, finally to get into the promised land. It was a permanent reminder to everyone about God's power and his ability. And I think we need to all stop and take the time to reflect on the moments that God has done something mighty in our lives. And sometimes they're small. Sometimes we don't even know they happened. And sometimes they're huge. But I think too often we don't hear, see, and understand because we are distracted. When I leaned back into the seat that night and I looked up and I saw the remnants of that sunset reflecting off the wing, and I thought that was my last breath, last moment on this earth, that is my sunset reminder. That is my monument of rocks on the Jordan. I cannot see a sunset now without remembering what God did huge in my life then and all the little things he's done along the way as well. Do you have something that reminds you of a time that God did something mighty for you? If not, maybe it's because you're distracted. Or maybe you're in a river experience right now. Maybe you don't have a personal relationship with God. Do you know God? Do you really know him in a personal way? He wants to have a relationship with each and every one of us. He doesn't want us to just be acquaintances. He wants to have a relationship. He wants full custody, not just weekend visitation. In James 4:14, it says, life is, and I'm summarizing, life is like a vapor. You are here for a little while and then you vanish. It's like fog on a river. It quickly disappears. We don't know when our last breath is going to happen. Just this past 2 weeks, I've had 3 classmates die. One drowned in a river, ironically enough. Just last week, I read of a 14-year-old young lady at prom was killed. A 17-year-old in Hanover died in a car crash. You just never know. Age is no predictor. We have tonight in the presence of this room tonight, we have someone that just 2 weeks ago today was 2 aisles away from the shooter at Farm Fresh. He witnessed the event. It could have been him. You just never know when your last moment on this earth is. Bible tells us that when we die, we stand before God in judgment. If we have accepted Jesus as our personal Savior, then we remain in heaven. But if not, hell is our destination. And it's not based on being good or doing good deeds. If we have not accepted Jesus' payment on the cross for sins, our final flight is to hell. Both destinations are for eternity. Do you have your boarding pass for eternity? Have you even thought about that? It's coming quickly. I flew on this airplane for at least 2 years. This is a picture of the armrest, and I forgot to bring it with me tonight. But on both of those armrests, imprinted, is "In God We Trust." And after the crash, I was out taking pictures of all the pieces and parts. You know, I was an NCIS investigator, just taking pictures of everything. And I saw that, and I came back and I asked John. I said, "What is up with that? Did you know that was there?" And he said, "Yeah, I knew that was there." After I saw that, he called. I can't remember the guy's name. The guy who sold him the airplane down in Florida, and he asked him what the story was. Well, the plane had been a trade-in, and as it turns out, the previous owner was a prison minister, and the nickname of the plane was Rapture. I can't make this up. Rapture is the time when Jesus is going to come back for his children, those who have placed their trust in him, and we're going to meet him in the air. So this plane was named Rapture because that's pretty much what you were doing. You had a lap belt and you were in the air. That's the closest to the rapture you're going to get on the earth, is in this airplane. You may not have a plane crash in your future, and I hope you don't. I truly, truly hope that you don't. But you know, you might have a health crash. You could have a relational crash. You could have a financial crash. There could be other types of crashes. Who are you trusting in? There is a final flight coming for us, and I'm going to ask Pastor to make his way up and close as he sees fit. But there is a final flight coming for all of us someday. And that's when we either die or Jesus comes back. And the destination choice is totally yours. No one can make it for you. Who are you trusting in? I hope it's Jesus. Pastor?